Today on Heavy Metal Frequency, I'm reviewing Opeth's Still Life. While for the foreseeable future, I'm doing some albums that are more ambient. This basically falls under those parameters because Still Life is a couple of the Opeth albums, like Still Life and some of their earlier stuff, like Orchid and Morning Rise, are almost like extreme ambient in a way. There's some black metal and death metal on here. This is like Black Death. It has a slight doom metal quality to it as well, just very slightly. Some of the tempos are slower. There's still a lot of stuff like death metal tempos, but there's a little bit more of things like like doom metal and jazz. The More starts with a really long, like trippy psychedelic jazz intro going into some flamenco and then into like a progressive Black Death type vibe, and then it still retains like a slight doom metal feeling to a lot of the songs, even though it's primarily based around other things like black metal, death metal, progressive rock, Latin jazz fusion pertaining to more Latin type stuff. I can hear some Santana, some Al Di Meola type stuff on here. But The More is a really impressive, like 11-minute opener. It's really cool that it's really cool and interesting that the longest tracks are the opener and closer, The More and White Cluster. And then Godhead's Lament is one of my favorite songs on here. The riffs on here are excellent. The guitar solos are some of my favorite guitar solos ever. Michael Ockerfeld's vocals, when he switches between like clean vocals, black metal, and death metal stuff, is really, really, really cool. And so Benighted is a really great like Latin jazz track. It's pure clean, I guess would be the way to put it, like clean vocals and stuff. Moonlapse Vertigo is it's another really, really cool track with this winding like psychedelic intro, and it goes into this really catchy like wall of sound metal type riff that's really, really cool. And then Face of Melinda is kind of like a prog Latin jazz, like Latin jazz adjacent prog track with it has some progressive metal to it, some catchy like Opeth type riffs, like octaves and stuff, but there aren't any harsh vocals on here, and the cleans work really well over that. It's really interesting to hear them do kind of like, it's the closest they've done to like a progressive metal song, I'll say, like an actual prog metal song. It's like a prog rock, prog metal song combined. It's really cool. And then Serenity Painted Death is another one of my favorite tracks on here. Has kind of like an Edgar Allan Poe vibe to it. It's really cool. And then it's a very intense kind of really nice like Black Death prog track again. And White Cluster is the final track. It's another 10-minute one. It's the second longest track after The More. And it's really, really interesting because it's almost like, I call it classical de-escalation, because it starts off as like a Black Death track, and then it winds down as the song goes on, and it gets lighter, and then it goes back into like a Black Death thing, and it has this awesome drum solo near the end, like a jazz comping thing that's really, really cool. And I wish Opeth would do more of that. It's really cool. And then it has this awesome metal solo, and then it reminds me of, they did a cover of Iron Maiden's Remember Tomorrow, and it reminds me of that a little bit. It's kind of neat, and it reminds me of Iron Maiden. It's like an Iron Maiden type solo in an Opeth song, which is really odd for them, and it's really, really cool. And so this is just a fantastic and impressive album, and I don't think it requires quite as much. I always say with these prog albums, you have to spend a lot of time with it. And yeah, you do, but for some reason, this might not take as much time or effort, and I highly recommend you listen to it. And it's a concept album. Listen to the whole thing at least a couple times to really get a feel for it. And I loved Still Life. And next up is some non-metal stuff. Next up is Steven Wilson's To the Bone. Thank you.